Hello, welcome to video 3. Today we're going to talk about kind of the tail end of 2006 and about halfway through 2007. So I modified my approach a little bit. My 2006 PowerPoint was a little bit superfluous. I also forgot to mention that in 2006 there were 3 studio films on top of the conspiracy films. There were 2 films on Flight 93, and then there was the Oliver Stone movie on the World Trade Center with Nicolas Cage. And also in late 2005 at a film festival, but in 2006 in the Americas, or more wide release, was V for Vendetta, which is very on the nose with a lot of the whole conspiracy versus government narrative, talking about buildings blowing up but the government lying about it, buildings used as a symbol. Also early 2000s, so that was 2006. Another thing in 2006 before we start into 2007 is there was a rift in the 9/11 truth movement, which I didn't really know about, but basically there were those people. Stephen Jones made a kind of a journal for more rigorous evidence-based papers on top alternative theories on what happened at 9/11, but it started to include a little, those directed energy weapon theories and no plane theories, and he didn't want those to discredit the more legitimate lines of inquiry regarding the destruction of the towers and other issues. So there used to be just Scholars for 9/11 Truth, and then that split off, and the more legitimate one was Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice. There was also a Journal of 9/11 Studies that was made that same year. So already belabored the point that 2006 was a big year. 2007, BBC footage of them announcing that the 47-story Building 7 has collapsed, even though live right behind the newscaster it was still present for another 20 minutes. And that, for me personally, when I saw that, I was already deeply invested and obsessed with the whole topic, trying to figure it out. When I saw that, that was just, I kind of threw my hands up. We're still waiting on NIST's official report. There was a critique that, there weren't a lot of engineers and architects supporting the 9/11 truth movement, and that was a big zinger in against the truthers at the as they were called at the time. So I put in. So first, I'll show you what I made in early June, or actually early May of 2007, and I tried to limit the focus just to the buildings, because to me, there's not as much of a jarring impact if you found out there's Saudi connections, or if you found out that NORAD was compromised, or these types of things are pretty believable. It's not that much of a stretch, and they're still terrible crimes. But the buildings being brought down is such a slap in the face. If it were true that they were demolished, and it seems so unnecessary and overkill. So I wanted to go over what I made in 2007 as an improvement over my previous PowerPoint slide. So this really is just the collapses of the towers in Building 7. So Building 7, there was still not an official explanation, but the official story obviously wouldn't include a demolition in it. There was, as you can see, this is the collapsing of Tower 1, and you can still see the core of the tower still intact briefly. And all these clouds are the debris hitting all the surrounding buildings, including 7, which is standing out because it was one of the taller ones. And it was on fire. as you could see, all this smoke was billowing. This is the official account that the raging fire weakened the structural steel. We can't see exactly what the damage was. This is, I guess NIST had a preliminary report, but their official report wasn't out yet. But as you can see, these are the core columns. And all of these are load bearing here. This isn't just an external facade. There was a internal failure that did precede the external collapse. You could see the penthouse, which is a tiny little like box looking thing, collapse first before the rest of it collapsed. Was there a controlled demolition? It's not just internet keyboard warriors. They're actually professionals. They're asking these questions. This collapsed within 10% of free fall speed is actually disproven, because that 10% was a calculation averaging the overall speed, but it wasn't measuring it in real time. David Chandler, I think, did the measurement and actually had NIST prove, I'll say NIST, proved that it was actually at free fall acceleration for several hundred feet on the initial drop, which is where you would expect the most resistance. And, the fact that all 47 columns are descending at that same rate uniformly is crazy. And the whole molten metal thing, still unexplained. Thermite is an incendiary that does melt steel. So the whole molten metal angle is perhaps there were thermite type incendiary devices on the columns that caused them all to simultaneously fall. But there's much more to it than that. It's not just standard thermite. Let's just say that. That's cool that the GIF is working even in the preview here. It obviously looks just like a controlled demolition. We've seen this before in the previous 2006 PowerPoint. Same thing with the thermal hotspot. So you can't dispute, it was just looked like molten metal, or, it's a misconception that it was molten because it just needed to be weakened to collapse. These temperatures prove that molten metal level temperatures existed. Why? In just those three areas. Tower 1, Tower 2, Tower 7. There's the common sense angle, but it's one common sense going against another common sense, because for many people, it's common sense that the government wouldn't secretly blow up this building and rig it. I like how I put 25 vertical steel columns. I wonder if I got that wrong. I have the count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's more than 25. But you can Google all this. I'm still 20 years old when I put this together. No excuses, but still. And then, as we saw in the 2006 PowerPoint, a pile of rubble 7 stories high compared to the other buildings right next to it. It's so crazy. One point of note that billowing smoke actually was coming from 5 and 6. That's a really good point because of how the wind was coming out, and then there's, I want to say convection. That might not be the right word, but it makes it look like the smoke's coming from it. And yeah, it wasn't this, like this side by side here is really good because yeah, there were fires, but it wasn't a raging inferno. Like this Windsor Tower, for example, did not collapse. Like you could just tell the difference is pretty obvious. People like to be nitpicky about it though, and they're like, oh, but the part that was on fire collapsed. And I would say to that, yes, sure. it was a partial collapse, and it wasn't at free fall speed. I mean, there's so many simultaneous characteristics. It's an uphill battle. And the fact that it was ignored, this was in the previous slide. And another point that I didn't include in here was the steel was rated for 2 hours of flames, and the way the fire progressed in these buildings, it was about 30 minutes per area. So once the fire burns all the fuel of the office furnishings, it doesn't just keep burning at the same spot. It kind of progresses. So there was no spot in the building that sustained 2 hours. And none of the fireproofing was dislodged like it was in the Trade Center towers. So you have fireproofing, and you have less than 2 hours of sustained fires. And what's crazy is that in the 2008 report, they did a physical test and nothing collapsed, which is why they went to the computer model. It's so ridiculous. And another point about that NIST report is credit where credit's due. That corporation, or whatever it is, it's a government agency at the end of the day. It is a very respected institution. And I got to see former members of that organization review the World Trade Center reports, and they were flabbergasted at the lack of quality. So, in other words, they spit out reports all the time about all kinds of things. And this one was clearly compromised. I don't know. I think a lot of engineers were kind of resting on trust in the reputation of that organization. And, another point of note that I don't think I included in here is that they only focused on the collapse initiation, not the collapse progression in any of the towers. So there wasn't even an attempt to explain the collapse progression. Yeah, so I basically conclude it was a demolition in this PowerPoint. Then we move on to the Twin Towers here. I skip all the details of the columns getting hit and what percentage, and I just go straight to a very generous assumption of annihilating the impact zone, what would happen in terms of the rate of collapse. And, I did mention that air resistance might add, a few seconds for that falling part. In a vacuum, it's about 10 seconds. Air resistance on the square acre might add 2 seconds. We don't even have to speculate that far. I don't have the equation to justify it, but it's still too fast even without that. Like, as you can see, this is a great illustration here. The intact structure below was not able to stop or even slow the collapsing section. That's just a fact. Another one of these, there's a lot more than 50,000 tons of salt. Like, there was lots of big numbers associated with this. And since it's outside of my area of expertise, structural steel frame buildings, I have an intuition, obviously, but because I'm not an expert, I can only go off what makes sense to me, and I can lean back on experts. And I can tell you with a high degree of confidence that it's not a consensus among experts that have examined this, because many experts who agree with the official story haven't examined it. And I would say I would honestly argue, out of all the people that have actually examined it that are experts, I would say a bigger percentage of them think it was a demolition. I mean, if you're an architect or an engineer, you have a 9-to-5 job, you've got your day full, you don't have time to go into the weeds in this. And with NIST, where they did focus on it, there were conflicts of interest, and there were ties to nanothermite, which Kevin Ryan has documented 10 major connections between the people doing the cover-up / lack of investigation on the collapse, where they did not follow the scientific method and their results are not peer-reviewed. It's just unbelievable how poor of an explanation it is. I mean, here we go. Mike Taylor of the National Association of Demolition Contractors was like, it looked like a classic controlled demolition. Ronald Hamburger, who was a structural engineer and contributor to FEMA and NIST reports, his first look at it, the day of, he's like, oh, it appeared to me that charges have been placed in the building. He backed away from that. And now, like, he gets grumpy if you ever bring it up. Kevin Ryan, a manager for Underwriter Laboratories, was fired for telling people how the Twin Towers collapse was impossible and that they must have been demolished. Yeah, because, I mean, he knew. He actually rated the steel of the towers themselves. So he was an expert, or is an expert. He's also, later on in 2013, he wrote a book called Another 19, which investigates government suspects. Unbelievably amazing book. They do exhibit unique demolition characteristics. Even if they weren't demolished, they're exhibiting unique demolition characteristics. So if you're going to say, well, it's too improbable that the government did this, well, you have to accept these other improbable things, or the lack of alignment between these dynamic characteristics that are observable and what happened. And the fact that it has not been explained. So you have an unexplained, anomalous set of observables that have yet to be reconciled, despite multiple agencies attempting to. And they have their explanations that dodge all the major anomalies. Their scope of investigation didn't use any of the evidence because most of it was destroyed, and ignored evidence that contradicted their theory, and ignored all the dynamics of the collapse itself. So that's just not convincing to me. I looked for it. You know, I've been back and forth on this a couple times, and I just wanted to understand how they fell, and there was nothing there. And the explanations that were given, like from Bazant's mathematical papers, made a lot of assumptions that didn't match what we saw, period. So it's just unconvincing. Oh, I guess I did include the plane damage here. Yeah, the majority of the columns were intact, including that gradient of severe damage versus heavy damage versus moderate damage. We've went over this before, what they were designed to sustain, because they're, you have this structure and it's going to be in the sky. You don't want it to fall. So they had it in mind when building it. We've went over this before. They're not showing it because they don't have it. Yeah, so this collapse, it can't be duplicated on any scale. Science is about repeatability. You can't even generously bias the model. So even if you try to change the parameters, make the top really heavy, make the bottom really weak, it still slows down. Nobody's been able to do it, period. And Mythbusters was tasked to, and then they opted out because they said, well, the scale, because of the square cube law, has an effect on how it looks. So even if you had a scale model, it wouldn't work. But we have computer models now, especially now in 2025. This was 2006, 2007. There's no excuse now. The fastest supercomputer they had for computer modeling, anybody can have on their gaming PC. And people have tried. I've seen a lot of YouTubers try to make one. And they all look like shit, and they all look different, and they all don't hit all the check marks for demolition characteristics. Yeah, so this Progressive Collapse Challenge was actually from Jim Hoffman's website. And he really, you don't have to use any of the blueprints. This is just kind of an open challenge that's still yet to be met. He just needs the vertical aspect ratio to be, 6.5. And it has to throw pieces outward in all directions so that by the end of the collapse, 80% of its mass ends up lying outside of its footprint. And a structure that can remain intact in 100-mile-per-hour crosswinds. And the Twin Towers, and you can make it out of any material you want. Wood, sticks, concrete. And, in the case of the Twin Towers, this was accomplished with steel and concrete. This is more of a, to the people I'm presenting it to. I have some links here. I was already on board with this. This at the time there was only like 100 people that signed on to this website, but now there's over 3,500. So I listed all these people here. Another good tool would be ChatGPT to take some claims and or specific names and ask it to verify. It's actually a lot easier than Google. So here's the example of this guy. He's trying to tell you what he knows, and CIA is telling him to keep his mouth shut. The other hard evidence. This is something I was actually interested in pulling up. So I'll show you. So I have this claim analysis expert here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this and ask it to give us some context here. This image raises a controversial claim by referencing a quote from Rex Toom to cast doubt on Osama bin Laden's responsibility. Let's conduct a truth quality analysis of the claim using a rigorous breakdown. Overall claim, because the FBI stated it had no hard evidence. What we can extract: the FBI was not on bin Laden's most wanted. Rex Toom stated the reason was a lack of hard evidence. Lack of absence implies Osama bin Laden was not involved, therefore bin Laden should not be considered responsible. So this is quite a great tool here, this claim analyst expert. So it gives you clarity levels, gives you the terms analyzed, has some notes. So logical leap from omission to innocence lacks definitional clarity here. Hard evidence is vague, could mean admissible in court or beyond reasonable doubt. And responsible can be interpreted legally, morally, or operationally. It goes, so here we go. Rebuttal analysis. So 9/11 Commission Report, CIA and NSA intelligence, and bin Laden's own video admissions link him to the attacks. The FBI's most wanted page may not reflect the totality of classified or international intelligence. Hard evidence suitable for the court is not the same as evidence used in national security determinations. FBI may have lacked prosecutable evidence, but not intelligence consensus. Interesting. Bin Laden did claim it. But what's being excluded here is the timing of these admissions. Like the 2004 videotape admission, like 4 days before the 2004 election, which was actually the first. Omission from a legal document doesn't imply innocence, of course. Clarify hard evidence. So while these claims are factually grounded, logical inference is weak and misleading. The argument commits logical fallacies and ignores broader evidence from intelligence and public statements. So it's partially misleading. Core facts are true, but conclusion lacks robust support. So, this is why, I didn't have this tool, obviously, back in 2007. But, I've been using these LLMs extensively to validate or invalidate these claims or gain further clarity on them. The fact that this was true, and there might be broader context. It's still startling that we would invest trillions of dollars into an overseas invasion of the Middle East on evidence that wouldn't be admissible in court. we've mentioned this guy already, George Tenet, director of the CIA, who I need to include more quotes from him because the fact that he would, basically admit that the FBI deliberately planted evidence that leads them to the 19 hijackers. I don't know what type of game he was playing in terms of muddying the waters there. And then I'm belaboring the point about, what a typical terrorist modus operandi is here. And also Bin Laden's quotes where he initially denied it. So I have a huge list of people here. This might be interesting to investigate later. So as you can see, much shorter than the first PowerPoint. I cleaned it up. I sort of was able to... and then at the end of 2007, I made a third one that's even shorter. So this was all. So this is what that 9/11 Truth website looked. They didn't get their logo until the next year, which is a pretty cool logo. And they also released this DVD that just went over the building collapses and no other details. There's lots of other details. But 2007 was kind of the wrap up. The only other really interesting things that happened after this year were the paper that found the unignited thermite, the nanothermite. And by then, the Bush administration was out. It was early 2009. And, public interest, basically fell off a cliff, as previously discussed. So in the next video, what I'm going to do is go over the PowerPoint I gave. I used that PowerPoint to give a presentation when I was studying abroad in Austria, and it was the most refined out of the three, obviously, and it was really interesting to see people's reactions because they were just sort of stunned into silence. And before I end this video, I just want you guys to know that I actually put together this timeline of 9/11 related media and as it was released each year. And as you can see, once we're at the end of 2009, there was a few things. We had Jesse Ventura waste his time with people. We had Geraldo actually listen to some of the 9/11 victims and engineers. We had a pretty good 9/11 explained in 5 minutes video come out, and this is one. All this is just almost like the quiet years, really. And then COVID hit, and everyone was distracted with that. So this is where we are now. So this is like ancient history, essentially, that we're going over. But yeah, so stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.